It's no joke. The basics really do matter. Hey, welcome to the party. It is great to have you back again. If this is your first time on the channel, thanks for giving us a shot. We really do appreciate it. This episode, we're going to talk about getting back to basics. I can't think of a single thing on earth that doesn't benefit from us every once in a while going back to the basics, the very simple way we started, the basis for how everything works. It really doesn't matter what the field of endeavor is. Every once in a while, we can overcomplicate life. And it helps if we just go back to the beginning and start over as a refresher and consider what's really, really important. And in the aviation world, I think maybe the most basic airplane and maybe the most iconic airplane most of us are familiar with is the Piper J3 Cub. Built in the 1930s and 40s, thousands upon thousands of pilots were trained to fly the Cub. You will rarely meet a pilot who doesn't either have Cub time or want Cub time. And anyone who's honest, who has flown a Cub very much, will tell you it's not a great airplane. It's kind of cramped, especially for modern Americans who are bigger people. It doesn't carry an enormous amount of weight. It's not fast by any means. It's kind of underpowered with the original 65 horse engine, although, the original had a 40 horse. If you're ever in Vero Beach, Florida, and you go into the main FBO building where the airline operates out of, Breeze Airline operates out of, there is an original Cub hanging from the ceiling. It is so basic. It will astound you. The classic yellow ones seem like real advancements to that. But the point is, the Cub was a super simple airplane. And what was great about it is it was very easy to fly, but it was fairly difficult to fly well. The gear is a little close coupled. You have to really work at it, especially if you have a crosswind when you're taxiing or taking off or landing. You're going to be using your feet. And with an aircraft that only weighs about 1,200 pounds fully loaded, that is as back to basics as most of us are ever going to get, the J3 Cub. I'll give you an example of how simple it really is. The airplane you're flying now has a pilot's operating handbook, which is probably pretty thick. If you're flying a relatively modern airplane, it's hundreds of pages with all sorts of information of exactly how that airplane works. The J3 Cub has a somewhat slimmer volume. As a matter of fact, the original book, How to Fly a Piper Cub from Piper Aircraft, was essentially a comic book. And I know that seems funny, but that was the way they conveyed information. Early on, there really wasn't a POH. That was a development that came later. Pilots just kind of figured it out as they went. As we went along, we got a little more specific and started to specify what takeoff speeds were, rotation speeds, VX, VY, VFE, VLO. All these things started to pop up, and we had really specific information. But in the beginning, not so much the case. So as we get back to basics and think about the essentials of flying, and that's all about being safe, not about being cool, your wardrobe notwithstanding. When you look at the Piper Owner's Manual, the Pilot's Operating Handbook, published in 1946 by Piper Aircraft, very near the end of the run of Piper J3 Cubs, it's only a very slim book, and it doesn't have a whole lot of extraneous information in it. As a matter of fact, when you get into the system section, the electrical systems is one paragraph, which essentially says we don't have one. We've got places in the panel that you might put a switch for navigation lights if you add an electrical system later, but this airplane doesn't have one. One of the things I really love about this book, it's inexpensive. You can find it on Amazon. I'm sure you can get it at Aircraft Spruce or whatever. It closes out with the 10 commandments for safe flying. And while it's written a little tongue in cheek, it's all valid information. It's just as valid if you're flying a 182 or a Cirrus or anything else modern off the line in 2025 as it was in 1946. So let's take a look at the 10 commandments for safe flying and see if they resonate with you. Because even after all these years in this business, every one of these makes absolute sense to me. Let's take a look. Number 1 in the 10 commandments for safe flying from Piper Aircraft 1946 reads, "Thou shalt not become airborne without checking thy fuel supply. The number of aircraft accidents that happen each year because of fuel starvation or fuel depletion, where there just isn't anymore, it's unfortunate. Always physically check your fuel. You've got the right kind of fuel, you've got the right amount of fuel, everything's working in your favor. Number 2, thou shalt not taxi with carelessness. Taxi slowly and make S turns to clear the area in front of the nose. Know the proper use of the controls for taxiing in a strong wind. Anyone who has ever flown a tail dragger knows that is rock solid information. You generally can't see out over the nose in a tail dragger, especially a J3 Cub, where the original version you sat in the back seat, you soloed it from the back, so you were quite a ways from the nose. And being a tail dragger, the tail being lower than the nose, you couldn't see forward over the nose of the airplane. So S turns going down the taxiway become absolutely essential. Number 3, still true today. Thou shalt ever take heed unto air traffic rules. We talk about this all the time, but it is absolutely valid. There is a way to get in and out of a towered airport or a non-towered airport. There are altitudes to cruise at. Everything is published. We all have it available to us. And even back in the 1940s, Piper Aircraft was saying, pay attention to those rules, because if you're being a cowboy out there, you really don't have much protection, and you might even become a threat to your fellow pilots. Number 4, thou shalt not make flat turns. Yeah, this is a 3-axis airplane. There are ailerons and elevator and rudders. Use them. Don't just skid around a turn because you're using the rudder and you're lazy. That's not going to work out for you long term. You might get away with it a lot, but eventually that's going to bite you in the butt, and you're really not going to like it. Number 5 is a rule that I've known since I was a little kid, because I was raised in an aviation family, and this one is out there and has been out there forever. I suspect this comes from Orville and Wilbur, or maybe Glenn Curtis, but not long into the aviation realm, somebody said, thou shalt maintain thy speed, lest the earth arise and smite thee. Man, truer words have never been spoken. And because the J3 is such a slow aircraft, they're warning you, don't get overconfident when you see an increase in ground speed when you're on downwind. Your airspeed is what you're concerned with. Don't get slow and try and make that base to final turn thinking you've been doing great. Watch your airspeed. That's a primary concern for any pilot. Number 6 is one that every single pilot should really take to heart, especially young men who are overloaded with testosterone and confidence and the belief that they are the new incarnation of Bob Hoover, because you're not yet. Thou shalt not let thy confidence exceed thy ability. This is just a human thing. You can become overconfident as you start flying and you get your private certificate, you solo, you're working on your instrument rating, and you start thinking, I'm really something. And sometimes you have to remember, I have relatively little experience. And that goes for me too. After doing this for 35 years, I'm still learning things as I go. There are times you have to kind of tamp down on that tendency we have to become overconfident, cool pilots. And remember, there's a lot going on out there. Let's just do the conservative thing, watch our airspeed, watch our altitude, do things correctly, get back to basics, and we're probably going to have a much better time in the long run, because when you land gear up or run off the end of the runway or stall just short of the runway, that means a call to the insurance company and the owner of the airplane, and you got to get somebody to tug it out of there, and everything about that is embarrassing. So just don't do it. Number 7 doesn't apply to modern airplanes, but it sure did apply in 1937 when the Cub was coming out. And it sure does apply to all those Cessna 150s, PA-28s, Cessna 172s that are out there from the old days. And it reads like this: thou shalt make use of thy carburetor heater. It is much easier to prevent carb ice than it is to eradicate carb ice. So learn when and where to use carb heat, because it can save you an awful lot of stress and strain. Nobody needs to be flying along and suddenly lose 300 or 400 RPM, the engine sputters, everything's bad. Because remember, when you pull the carb heat on, initially it gets worse. You're feeding richer air into that carburetor system, which makes it run even worse. So you have to understand how the system works well enough to go, I'm better off using carb heat to prevent this from happening than I am trying to get rid of it. But if I end up with carb ice and I have to turn that carb heat on, just ride it out while it gets a little rougher and you lose a little bit more RPM, but be looking for someplace to go if it doesn't improve, because you never know what's going to happen. Number 8 is particularly important, again, to those young folks who think, I can do anything because I'm bulletproof. And it simply says, thou shalt not perform aerobatics at low altitudes. Basically, their thought is aerobatic maneuvers initiated at a low altitude may conclude 6 feet underground. Don't do it. It's not going to work out for you. Number 9 is something we could all fall prey to, and it's something we all have to think about consciously. And it is, thou shalt not allow indecision in thy judgment. The airplane in flight is no place to be thinking about, gee, I wonder what I should do now. Ostensibly, we have trained for every scenario. We know what to do, and we think ahead of the airplane. We don't want to just be barreling along and whatever happens, happens, and I guess my superior skill will get me out of this. That's a great story later on at the bar, but it's not something you want to experience firsthand in flight. So make sure you have a plan, make sure you stick to that plan, and make sure there's a plan B or C in case plan A doesn't work out quite the way we thought it might. And number 10, maybe the best advice, just all encompassing, this is true no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you fly. Thou shalt know always, the good pilot is the safe pilot. You're not trying to be the fastest. You're not trying to skim the treetops the lowest. You're not trying to do aerobatics in a non-aerobatic airplane to prove how cool you are. You're just trying to be safe. Because if you fly, and you fly a long time, you'll have plenty of experiences to tell stories about. But if your goal is to be a safe pilot, you're going to have a long career. Things are going to go well for you more often than not because your guiding light is not cool, is not being impressive. It's not hoping that somebody is standing on the porch at the FBO going, oh my God, look at that. Your preference is people say, yeah, they're fine. They're safe. I'd fly with them. That might be the best compliment any pilot can get when another pilot rides along with you and at the end of the ride says, you're good. I'd fly with you. These 10 lessons are something that I really hope you keep in mind. The 10 commandments for safe flying, straight from Piper Aircraft in 1946. So right after you like this video and subscribe to the channel because you just found this so compelling you have to, please leave a comment below. Do you have any Cub time? Do you have Champ time, Tailorcraft? Do you have Tail Dragger time in anything at all? Do you understand why these lessons, these 10 commandments, are actually really important even today, even if you're flying a turbine-powered tricycle gear aircraft? The basics keep us out of trouble. And I hope you have a great flying career for as long as you want to have it. We'll see you next time, right back here on MadPropsAero.